Good afternoon. My name is Tiffany Taylor, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Chief People and Impact Officer for GSB. I am thrilled to welcome you to this week's episode of GSB TV that connects all things news to knowledge. Hopefully, you've been enjoying this series over the last few weeks, as there will be many more to come. Today, we're here to talk about what is clearly the biggest phenomenon to hit the K-12 market in decades: high-impact tutoring. Whether you're a leader on the front lines in our schools, a philanthropist supporting these efforts, an entrepreneur creating scalable solutions, or an investor in this space, we can all agree that high-impact tutoring is a critical need, and there are lots of questions that we're still trying to wrap our arms around. And who better to help us have this important conversation than Dr. Janice Jackson and Kevin Huffman. Dr. Janice Jackson is a former student, teacher, principal, Chief Education Officer, and Chief Executive Officer for the Chicago Public Schools District. Under her leadership, she propels CPS students to record-breaking academic gains and is continuing her work to support the next generation of Chicago students as the CEO of Hope Chicago. She also serves as the executive chair of the Accelerate Board. And we're also joined by Kevin Huffman, who is the CEO of Accelerate, which is a national nonprofit launched to support the growth and success of tutoring and personalized learning in public schools. Kevin began his career as a first and second grade bilingual teacher in Houston, Texas. And prior to helping launch Accelerate, Kevin was a partner with the City Fund, a philanthropic nonprofit where he supported the local efforts of leaders in cities across the country. He was a national executive leader for Teach for America and the former Tennessee Commissioner of Education. My hope is that today is truly a conversation that sheds light on this most important topic for educators, entrepreneurs, investors, and policy leaders alike. My ask is that GSB community members who are with us today join in this conversation by submitting your questions via the Q&A box. And with that, I'd love to have Janice and Kevin join us. All right. So when we came together to consider this conversation, we grounded ourselves in some of the challenges that our schools, our educators, and our students are facing, particularly in the light of the ongoing pandemic. Student attendance, behavior, and mental health are suffering, academic ground has been lost, and learning gaps have widened. And simply put, our educators have given so much to our students and our communities, but that weight is becoming too much to carry, and many are considering leaving the profession altogether. And while school systems are on track to spend $3.6 billion in the next 2 years on tutoring, there are many unanswered and quite honestly unsettling questions about quality, implementation, and sustainability. But both of you saw all of these challenges as an opportunity. I love to start our conversation by simply hearing, why is this a once-in-a-generation opportunity to expand high-impact tutoring? And would love to hear a little bit about the role Accelerate will play. Janice, let's start with you.
Oh, I was going to kick it to Kevin, but happy to start.
Yeah.
Well, first, we're happy to have Kevin on as the CEO, because I think it just provides an amazing opportunity for what, as you have described, is a once in a lifetime opportunity. It's no secret that the pandemic has had a drastic impact on student achievement here in the United States. And so when you think about the toolkit that educators have to combat that, it's very, there isn't a lot in there, but there are some things that we know that are tried and true, and high impact tutoring is really one of the approaches that we believe districts should be implementing. And I'm happy to report that most districts see the value there as well. I think what it provides is an opportunity to provide personalized instruction and learning for students, which we know works in all types of situations, but especially when you're trying to recover and really understand where students are and how you can help them get to the next level. I think the other opportunity here is that, there's an infusion of cash in school districts that hasn't been there before, and people should take advantage of that to use it in a way that you can really leverage. It seems like a lot of money, but when you add it all up for the things that we have to combat, it really isn't a lot. And so we need things that are high leverage that can have a huge impact. And then the third thing I would say is that we know a lot about what high dosage tutoring should look like. And it really does prioritize relationships and frequency and in-person opportunities. But there is emerging research that is showing that distance learning and personalized learning and leveraging leveraging ed tech tools is also a viable pathway and solution. And we saw a lot of those things emerge and take hold during the pandemic. And so I think Accelerate enters at a really nice time where we can kind of help assess what's going on, provide information back to the field, and I believe provide direction for public education for generations to come.
Thanks, Janice.
Yeah, I totally agree with Janice on the moment in time. It's just an interesting moment when you have people's focus on how we're going to catch kids up. Yeah. And then you have the infusion of public funds, and then you have significant innovation on the private sector side. And the question is, can we actually leverage that into something that extends beyond not just the pandemic, but also the time frame of the federal funding? And so Accelerate is attempting to help scale things that work in education. And we are focused in tutoring on providing funding to spur research, to fund innovation, to build communities of practice, to develop the knowledge base, and then to share for widespread adoption. I think there's a really strong research base around certain kinds of tutoring that shows that it works, and an emerging evidence base that shows that other things have enormous potential. Mm-hmm. And then you've got districts that are attempting to implement things at scale that are hard to scale because of challenges with human capital, challenges with management and implementation of things that involve, enormous numbers of people. And so the opportunity to figure out different paths that might actually work for districts over the long haul, and that might be able to be run at a price point that districts can afford after federal funding runs out. It's an exciting moment in time, but it all hinges on evidence, and it all hinges on whether we can find things that are proven to work.
I love that. I want to build upon that because I agree with you. As long as I've been in the space as an educator, the research has said the same thing. You're right. Effective interventions, are possible if we have those design principles related to frequency, group size, training for tutors, and curriculum. And I truly hope that everyone had the opportunity to read the white paper that we sent out yesterday that dives deeper into those guiding principles, and to just get a look at the growing number of ed tech companies that have been working in this space, like Paper and Remind and Tutor by Teachers, Amplify, Book Nook, and Tutor.com, just to name a few. When you think about the guiding principles, and when you think about all of the players that are currently in the space and that are coming into the space, Janice and Kevin, how are schools and districts determining the offerings and the companies that are best set up to deliver the strongest outcomes for our students?
Yeah, well, I'll start just thinking about how I thought about this as a superintendent. And if we're being honest, during the pandemic, a lot of those decisions were driven by need and urgency, right? Mm-hmm. So it was who can produce, who can work at whatever scale, I'm working from, depending on the size of your district. And I think that was the right approach. I surely made decisions in the moment just because we were under the gun, to be quite honest, and had to get things done. I don't know that any superintendent was paying as much attention to some of those design principles that you pointed out. You wanted a tool that would be easy to implement, easy for teachers to use, easy for students and parents, because remember, they were co-teaching with us, easy for them to access. What I have said to a lot of the ed tech firms that I either work with or have had conversations is that if people want to be sustainable, that they have to eventually test their products. It can't just be, we went from 2,000 kids to 2 million. Well, everybody did because there was a sense of urgency. But as dollars become, there's fewer dollars become available to school systems as boards, whether it's local school boards or state boards, are becoming more sophisticated and discernible around what are quality products. They are asking questions around performance and outcomes. More standardized test data is becoming available. So people are asking really critical questions. And so you really do need to evaluate the efficacy of these programs, and it has to be tied directly to student achievement. We know that the market demand is there. So having more subscribers is not enough to explain your value. You really have to show that you are narrowing achievement gaps, helping students catch up. And also, more importantly, if your product helps students get ahead, that's also something that's going to be very valuable in this kind of post-pandemic market.
I love that. I love that. Kevin, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think that was really well said. I mean, it's just such a wide range in terms of how districts and states are approaching this right now. And there are a number of states now that have put out a lot of money on a pro rata basis out to districts for tutoring. And then districts are spending it in a variety of ways, from sort of implementing their own programming, using their own personnel, which frequently leads to running into scale and management challenges, or signing contracts with outside vendors, which can be good, but it also depends on the evidence base of the vendor. I guess what I would say is, just to sort of like peek into the future, I do think, one, that we're going to build a better evidence base for a lot of different products and organizations and styles of implementation that work. And two, I think we're going to wind up almost inevitably with state regulation and state funding that drives against that evidence base.
Yep.
And so I do think we're going to wind up in a world in a few years where, if you want your product adopted by districts, it's going to be very important to have a research and evidence base, because states are going to have regulations that require a little more discernment, as Janice said.
I appreciate that. So this idea of urgency and need, Janice, that really resonated with me, just given the line of sight that I have. But are there any other lessons that you've learned over the last just 12 to 24 months that should inform how we create and evolve, right, and implement high impact tutoring, right? Be it virtual, in person, hybrid. What are those hard lessons learned that entrepreneurs and educators must hold top of mind as we work toward supporting our students?
Yeah, I think as we look for opportunities for innovation, we can't forget things that are tried and true and trusted, right? We know that the role of the educator is important in any of these settings. We know that in the best case scenarios, when any kind of tutoring is tied directly to curriculum and what the students experience during the school day, that it's going to have a greater impact than just, practice around disparate skills that a student may need to brush up on. And so I guess my message would be, how do you merge the opportunity to innovate? And I do believe that opportunity exists. I'm actually super excited about that. I think we have to be smart in the education field and think about how to leverage technology. The one thing that came out of the pandemic, I was about to say good or bad. I'm just going to say, quite frankly, was good, is that it accelerated the use of technology, the use of integrated methods in the classroom in a way that I think would have taken the field of education another 10 years to do, quite honestly, had it not been for this catastrophe that forced us to innovate. And so when I'm talking to, whether it's educators or, folks who are trying to market and sell these tools, I think it's all about, how do we merge the opportunity with what we know already works? And then we can't forget how important teachers are in this. Teachers can really help accelerate a lot of the work. They can help us refine tools and make them better. And so engaging with educators, not replacing them, which I don't think anybody thinks that they can do, but really just paying a lot of attention to the role of the teacher, I think is going to help us go a long way. And then the last thing, and this is much more macro, is just that as school districts, a lot of us were able to get to a one-to-one status much faster than any plans or desires we may have had. We should not abandon that. That should become a part of how we think about education, right? Students should have access to technology. They should have access to these tools. They should know how to, migrate in and out of different platforms. That's the way of the world in the workforce that they're going to enter. And so, snapping back to what we were doing before the pandemic would just be, a disservice to the students that we serve. And so those are some of the messages that I would want to continue to amplify and lift up.
Yeah. Kevin, any additional lessons learned? And I would also love to hear from you all. And I'm also surfacing some of the questions from our attendees. Just candidly, what are some of the reasons, right? Now that we have, I don't want to say gotten past this need, this urgency and this need, but when districts are saying, no, that's not a solution that I want or I need, or no, that platform will not work for me. What are some of the reasons that are underneath those hard stops?
Well, just on the first point, just building on lessons learned, and I agree with everything that Janice said. I would add, one size doesn't fit all. And so even in the context of tutoring, I hear people tend to start talking about, online or hybrid or in person or delivered via this way, as if it's going to be a solution for all kids. And we're supposed to have a fight over which of these solutions works for all kids. And the whole point and concept of the personalized learning is that it's personalized. And I just think people can lose track of that pretty quickly. And then on the product side, I think people are working on a variety of tools that have elegant solutions to real problems.
Yeah.
But they may be like one of 6 things that need to be fixed in the chain. And keeping in mind that if you're a classroom teacher, you can't manage like 6 different tools that fix different pieces of the challenge and problem. Then you wind up with a tool to manage your tools. And I think there's a little of that goes on sometimes, which I think I would segue into the why don't people adopt things? Well, I mean, one thing is people are just incredibly busy. In school districts right now, it is hard and people are working like crazy. And if they can't figure out very quickly how they would implement something without a massive amount of professional development and training and support and so on, it's hard just because of how busy people are. So that's one thing. And 2 is, I think, proof. People want to believe that what they're going to do is going to work. And they want some evidence base that shows not just other people use it, but other people have used it effectively for the purpose that it's intended.
Yeah. I would, just to build on that, I think a couple of things, especially what we experienced in CPS, looking for interoperability was always important. And so if ever it was just standalone, not connected to the district, not connected to some of the other systems, that always made adoption a little bit more difficult. And so I know people try to work around that through district-wide licenses and things like that. But I think that I've been approached with people that have good solutions, but if it doesn't integrate with our existing systems, it just makes it that much more difficult. And connected to that are the multiple logons, which I think, we've gotten to a much better place around that, but that's still an issue. I remember during the pandemic, I got a lot of emails from parents that were like, my child has 7 logons. I mean, and they were outraged, rightfully so. And so we were trying to get up to speed on that. And so I think that that's one thing. And then the other thing that I think, and Kevin kind of hit on this, talking about people are busy, and what's underneath that is that it's hard to make a decision or to discern what's the right tool. You have a lot of complicating factors beyond what I need to educate my students. I would often ask myself, why is this open source and then this one is subscription? Or why does this have, so those are the kind of questions that consumers are asking, just like any other consumer in any market. And so I would encourage people to think about, what is the value? Why would somebody pay for something that they think may not be the same tool, may not be as effective, and hopefully Accelerate will help people think about that. But those are some of the questions that people ask, and those are some of the things that are confusing to the consumer when they can't really discern, why is this program free versus a program that I have to pay for? And so personally, I think when it's integrated, connected to the curriculum, intuitive for both the student, teachers, and parents, or whoever else is supporting the students, that always kind of accelerates things for me. And then the other thing that I would say is when there are good reporting mechanisms, where if I can generate reports that tell me how students are performing on skills, or, however things are organized, if there are reports I can share with parents to have a conversation about student performance and progress, things I can share with administrators. I feel like those are the things that kind of differentiate are differentiating factors, I should say, for me as to whether or not I'll pay for something versus kind of working my way through some of the free open source resources.
I appreciate you really speaking to the lived experience of our students and our parents as they're interacting with these platforms and these offerings. We've heard some anecdotes from certain providers that, procurement and selection, that's not the issue that districts are struggling with, but they're really having a hard time trying to source and place students to take advantage of the offerings. Does that line up with what you're seeing? And what can everyone be doing to get our students in a better place to really leverage these programs once they're in place? And how can companies help?
I think some of the stuff, Kevin,
No, go
I'll
ahead.
be short. I think I said a lot of this, but I think in places where it's connected to the curriculum, I don't want to name like a particular
that's fine.
tool, but I can think of one where, when teachers assign this and it's part of, homework practice or something else, that typically goes a lot further than just kind of the big announcement, go use this tool to brush up on a skill set, or, use this tool for homework help for, an answer to, a question that you may be stumped on. That requires more work and alignment. But I think that's how you kind of get past, a few people using or adopting a product to maybe whole school adoption or whole district or network adoption.
That's helpful.
Yeah, and I was going to go in a slightly different direction, which is just this sort of brand and parent understanding of tutoring. I don't know if folks saw the Brookings Institute report that came out a couple of weeks ago that said, less than 30% of parents said that they want tutoring.
Yep.
And it's interesting because we could all hypothesize on what exactly it means. But I do think one thing it means is that tutoring continues to be branded as an idea that is remedial, that it is, your kid's behind, and so they have to do tutoring, as opposed to what we're talking about is what every parent wants. We want your child to be viewed as an individual, to be reached and taught where they are and advanced as far and as quickly as possible. And that's what we all want for our kids. But I think, the nomenclature has created a world where it feels like, we just had this pandemic and now you're saying we got to do remedial work. And I think if you want parents on board, you got to talk about it in a slightly different way as well.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And it's leading me to want to hear your thoughts. And so I'll take us in a different direction. I'll say one of the things that just make me so grateful for just the opportunity to sit in this seat is just the opportunity to learn nearly every day from leaders like you. So each week I spend time connecting with superintendents and principals and thought leaders from around the globe, learning about the work that they're taking on in service of our students and communities. And nearly all of them are hyper focused on finding, retaining, and supporting great teachers and principals. So two questions here. How can high impact tutoring be best integrated with the classroom teachers' work and leadership? Not necessarily the systems and the platforms reducing logins, but true integration as a practitioner, right? Executing that lesson and facilitating that learning. And more broadly, how does high impact tutoring help or solve or exacerbate teacher shortages in this moment in time?
I feel like those are two big questions. I don't know which one to start with. I think on the integration front, much of the curriculum that students are presented with is designed by teachers, even if the district or school provides guidelines for, what should be taught. And so I think time for teachers to plan and share best practices is always needed. I think one of the things that tends to happen is it's easy to fall back on what you've always done because time is so limited and you have to teach students. And then you have the pressure of standardized tests and all these other things that teachers are trying to contend with. And so, I think schools that provide an opportunity and structure for that see better outcomes. I also think helping teachers understand, how to have the right balance between, both providing daily instruction, tier 1 instruction to everybody, but then organizing their classes or after school activities to support students who need additional support and intervention. That's always a struggle. And if people don't have the resources and the time to do that, the students end up suffering as a result of that. And I guess that's somewhat tied to your question about the teaching shortage, because teachers are just tired. I mean, after the pandemic, we heard it over and over again, and there's a lot of validity in what's being said around the pressures that were put on them to teach, in a new way, to deal with all the COVID restrictions. And, we were all there, so I don't have to rehash that. It was a nightmare. And so if we do this right and it provides students with the, right amount of intervention and support, remediation, if that's what's necessary, I think it makes the teacher's job easier going forward. I think if we fail to do that, I think it makes an already difficult job much more difficult, and you continue to see more people choosing or opting to leave the profession. I also have to call out the fact that, there have been some teachers that have left the profession to go into, other roles where they're needed. And so we got to unpack that as well. You have teachers who are working for ed tech companies now. They know that they can have flexible work schedules like other people in different industries where that wasn't the case before. And, I can speak for myself here in Chicago. I think we were unprepared for that phenomenon. And so that, coupled with it already being a difficult job, there were already issues around teacher shortages prior to that. It's kind of the perfect storm. And I know it's the biggest issue that every single school district or superintendent that I talk to is facing.
Appreciate that.
I would say on the plus side, tutoring is an opportunity to help a lot of people, one, get the bug for teaching and really understand that this is something that can bring them personal satisfaction where they can have an impact. And I think that's excellent. And two, it should, if we get the regulatory structures right, also facilitate people getting licensed as teachers. And so I see this in a few different ways. You've got opportunities for paraprofessionals. People have long talked about the question of how do you get more paraprofessionals to become teachers, and tutoring as a possible way that provides part of that bridge is a really interesting potential opportunity that some people are working on. Then you've got the question of college kids, and can you get college kids to tutor and have that help influence their career trajectory? I think there's evidence right now that that might work and that that's a real opportunity as well. You've got pre-service teachers. So you got people in teacher preparation programs who they're already attempting to become teachers, but of course, half the people in teacher prep programs never actually enter the classrooms. Well, one way I think to get more of them to enter the classroom and to be successful in the classroom is to integrate tutoring effectively into teacher prep programs where you're marrying a real need on the ground with an opportunity to inspire and teach teachers. And I would extend it all the way down into high school. I had the chance to talk to a 17-year-old this past week who started a tutoring program in her community. She's got 100 teenagers who are tutoring younger kids across the city. It started organically. And I guarantee you, most of those teenagers didn't see themselves as future teachers, but the ability to sort of help a kid and see the impact you can have, I think can change your trajectory. So I think there's huge opportunity to help more people funnel into the career if we can recruit people to work with kids this way.
I love it. So switching gears a little bit, some of the skeptics are saying that a lot of districts, again, and I named this a bit earlier, are struggling to get tutoring to the kids who have the greatest academic needs. And in some instances, it ends up being focused on higher achieving students because either their schedules are easier to navigate or they're more willing to consistently engage, right, with the tutoring offerings. Thoughts on if this is something that you're seeing, or is this the right approach? Would love to hear your reactions to that.
I think Kevin alluded to this a little bit earlier when he talked about the fact that different people, people see tutoring differently, which I think is something that we have to overcome. And I think that principals and teachers, we can play a big role in communicating that. I know when I was growing up, if you went to tutoring or summer school, it was like you were in trouble, right? And then, fast forward to where I am today, my kids are going to go to tutoring no matter what, because I know that it helps them get ahead. They're going to learn over the summer because that helps them get ahead. And really just explaining that, I think is important in something that shouldn't be lost. I think this is one of the reasons why I do get excited about some of the ed tech tools, because not everything can be done during the class day. As I heard you teeing up the question, I went exactly to how we respond to that in education, which is like, well, we'll do it during the school day, which is, I won't say that's a bad decision or the wrong decision. People are just trying to figure it out. But the problem is when you spend time there, you're not spending time on tier 1 instruction. And so students do suffer as a result of that. And it really does require high quality tier 1 instruction during the school day with the right resources and supports, and then the additional intervention to help either remediate or keep kids on track or accelerate. And that is very difficult to do when you're in a school where there are, limited resources, or where you have, maybe you don't have enough teachers who are willing to teach the programs because of all the demands during the workday. And so I don't know if I have great answers to it, except to lift it up and explain that it is a real thing. But I think that's one of the places where some of these more creative ways of thinking about high dosage tutoring can be impactful. And then I do think one of the things we saw here in Chicago at the high school level is when we did provide those supports during the school day, in particular for math, we did see market improvement amongst the students. And so when you can really clearly make the case that if we, take an hour or class period of instructional time to do this type of intervention, and it does move the needle in a way that's meaningful for students, then I think it's worth it. And I think that goes back to the original, mission and purpose of Accelerate, is to really help more providers and districts be able to document that impact so that when you're making these trade-offs, you understand why before it's too late.
I appreciate that. And so just thinking about the capacity that you referenced of our educators and all that they are carrying, are you aware of any districts that are implementing the high impact tutoring model successfully? Like, which districts are really doing so with fidelity and seeing strong results, not just promise, or even just incremental progress, but you can confidently say that they are implementing the model with fidelity and seeing strong results for their students consistently?
I don't want to put a target on anyone by saying, these people are the exemplar. And I think the truth is that the districts that we have tracked and worked with are all pretty self-critical as they attempt to scale. And so they none of them, I think, are saying we're hitting a home run with this. I think they're all saying we see signs of improvement and we want to both continue to scale this and also get better while doing it. And so I don't want to sort of say anyone's hitting a home run. I think Guilford County in North Carolina is a district that Accelerate worked with this past year and is continuing to work with. And they have, through partnerships with local universities and through a tutoring division in their central office, which really is focused on implementation and trying to resolve problems and is very teacher focused in terms of ensuring that teachers are getting value out of it. Yep. They've seen value and they're doubling the scale up to 10,000 kids this year, which is a lot of kids. But I think they would say it's a long, slow walk. And they would like it to be bigger and they want it to continue to improve. Yeah. And so I don't think anyone should go into this thinking, year one, we're going to hit a home run. Yeah. I think people should go into this because it's good instructional practice. Yep. And it's the kind of thing that over the long haul will ensure that kids learn more. And I think people need to view it as a continuous improvement exercise.
I appreciate that. So sticking with this, this question around who is actually providing the tutoring and capacity among the various providers we named earlier and countless others, we're seeing a mix. Some use volunteers, others are using former or current teachers. What are the benefits of each offering, and what's your view on the importance of trained teachers or trained tutors being involved there?
Well, I definitely have a preference towards trained teachers as tutors, and also retired teachers or pre-service teachers. I think there's a lot of value there as well. I think some of the value that people find in other models is just there's a big lift, and so you need a lot of people, and because of the shortage, you may venture beyond that, and I think that works in some disciplines and at some grade levels, but I also think there are certain subjects where you just simply need the expertise. But what I would also say is, even if you have a qualified, a cohort of qualified teachers, based on whatever certification process in their respective states, I think it's more important that there is frequency and that there are relationships between the
Yep.
tutors and the students. I think the research has made clear that really can be a game changer in a
Yep.
lot of ways. And so I think that, just like everything else, we should pay attention to both and everything. But, if I were, focusing on launching a program like this, I would definitely want to make sure that frequency piece and the relationship piece was there, because I just, kind of have a bias towards that and think that that's really going to move the needle.
I love it.
Just to add a couple things to that, I think clearly some form of training and professional development for tutors is really important, not just training on the front side, but professional development as they're going along. So either management and oversight or additional coaching that helps tutors get better. I think part of what's interesting and promising about this is, there's some evidence that a wide range of people can be effective tutors,
Yep.
which is exciting if you give people the right conditions. And I would add that as you think about the human capital challenges of just mobilizing an army of potential tutors around the country, there are a lot of things that we don't know yet and that we will figure out, I hope, over the next year or two, including if you have all the elements of effective tutoring, but the tutor is delivering it over a screen. So it's still the same, it's a person. They have they have a relationship with their kid. They're delivering over the screen. What if you have that, but they are doing this for 1 or 2 times a week, and then a couple times a week there's some additional AI-enabled, computer-enabled work that's happening. These are the kinds of things that are important because it will drive how hard it is to recruit people to become tutors, how many people you need, what the cost is. And I think if we can start to zero in on the idea that some of these things work for some kids in some settings, then you can start to get at the human capital challenges, the scalability, et cetera.
I love that. Talk a little bit about how tutoring providers will be evaluated for learning efficacy. We've touched on this a little bit. We've touched, Janice, you said it's not enough for you to tell me how many students you're reaching. I need to know what the academic outcomes are. I want to circle back to that. Can we talk a little bit more about how should we be evaluating for learning efficacy?
I mean, for me, definitely connecting it back to student achievement and outcomes is where I'm going to always go. But I don't know how much insight Kevin wants to give and where we are from a research design standpoint. But student outcomes, student achievement is the core for me.
Yeah, and we're working with, first of all, a number of providers that are doing some research on this, and then also with research partners who are working on measuring this, and people are using different things. So some people are using formative benchmark assessments like MAP or iReady, which can be really useful, I think, especially if you're wanting information in the moment. Others are using the curricular-based things. People are using DIBELS and things like that to sort of, and then of course, there's end-of-year assessments as a way of looking at a program's efficacy overall, which is important for the long term, but doesn't necessarily help you in the moment. And so we've got research that's being conducted over dozens of different districts and programs that are using different kind of metrics. But I just think, so first of all, I think academic achievement in the subject areas is really important. Second of all, I think the more we can start to get at some of the social emotional learning pieces with data, there are a lot of truisms in the field that that people say and that I think are probably right about, like the importance of relationships between the tutors and the students. Be great to start to build more of an evidence base of what that is and what that looks like, and how do you know that that's the case, and what are attributes of tutors that might lead to that being the case.
I love that. So as we are nearing the end of our time together, and I must say that it went by way too quickly, I want to hear a little bit about Accelerate. Just from the applications that have been submitted so far, are you seeing any patterns among the organizations applying? Is it more tech-based tutoring versus person-based tutoring, or more established organizations and companies that are looking to scale versus startups?
It's been an incredible range. So we put, for people who don't know, we put out this call to effective action, which was sort of like an RFP into the universe to see what was out there, and had more than 200 organizations or partnerships or districts apply. And you almost can't categorize it because it's such a wide range. I would say you have people who are trying to take on implementation challenges. And so they are saying, tutoring is great, and we want to have more of it, but there are these implementation challenges. Mm-hmm. There are people who are taking on product challenges. The question of, well, if you use this product, could you, for instance, for younger kids, have it be only 15 minutes a lesson instead of 45 minutes a lesson, right, and still get the same level of efficacy? And then you have people who are thinking about policy barriers to the scale of tutoring. So it's just a really wide range, and it's really impressive to see the work that people are doing.
I love it. I love it. Well, as we close, you both have shared just so many insights. What is the call to action for leaders, and again, educators, entrepreneurs, investors, policymakers, as we work together just to support the academic and holistic growth of our students and make good on this once in a generation opportunity?
I mean, I think we just have to throw everything we have at the problems that exist now in public education. I've been a big champion about closing achievement gaps and equity for all for a long time, but I would be lying if I didn't say I was more upset and as a result, even more motivated after the pandemic, as we saw like what those outcomes look like for students and how disparate they were for Black students, in particular, low income students across this country. And so we really do have an issue. I'm worried about this generation and what their experiences have been in school and how we recover from that. And I think everybody working in this space knows and gets that. People are still showing up for kids every day because they understand how important this is. But I also think that it has to be a recognition that we have to do the work that we were doing before and more, because we've lost a lot of ground, and our kids, a whole generation, is counting on us to really get this right. And so we've had more money injected into public education than ever before. We have to make good on that as well, so we can continue to advocate for better funding in public education beyond, money for the COVID disaster. We need more money in public education in general so that we can close these stubborn gaps.
Thank you.
Ditto. And I would just say, in the next 3 months, NAEP results are going to come out. They are going to show that this country is behind where we were in 2019. Mm-hmm. There is invariably always political pressure to just sort of turn the page and move on and declare this a new normal. And we cannot, as a country, for all the reasons Janice articulated, declare that 2019 was somehow the pinnacle of American education. We had problems in 2019.
Yes.
And we cannot just say that was the best that it gets. We have to dig down and not stop funding and supporting and pushing on data-driven interventions until, our kids are where they need to be.
I appreciate that. Well, Janice and Kevin, thank you for being here. Thank you for all the wisdom and insights you share with us. And most importantly, thank you for all you do as leaders in the work. And to our GSB community, thank you for joining us today for this important conversation. It's my hope that you walked away from our time informed and inspired and ready to continue our collective efforts. Again, this is just one of the many conversations we're having in this series. So please complete the survey you'll receive after this event to share feedback and share additional topics that you want to learn more about. We look forward to seeing you at the next event, and take care, folks.